Good morning. I'm Pat Thurston. Russ Baker, my guest. His book is Family of Secrets. The family, of course, that we're talking about is the Bush family, and we've been talking about Prescott Bush. And I wonder if we should skip forward a bit, or if we should get into some of the nitty-gritty that happened around the time. I mean, you just mentioned 1963, and 1963, wasn't that the year of the Kennedy assassination?
Well, this all needs to be sort of set up.
Okay.
I mean, I think that what I was explaining earlier was that I came on this story because of my curiosity as to how someone as improbable and ultimately controversial as George W. Bush became president. And as I studied him, I started finding all these anomalies, all these things that didn't make any sense. And one of the things I looked at was his military service record. In 2004, you'll remember there was all that controversy. Had he or had he not finished his military service? And I established, and I document in several chapters of Family of Secrets very clearly, that he did not, that he literally skipped out on 2 of 6 years of service during the Vietnam War. Now, this, of course, everyone I interviewed in the military said you would go to jail for something like that, and nobody could get away with it, and yet he did. There clearly had been an extensive cover-up at the highest levels. They had apparently removed records, falsified records, and so forth. And it became clear to me that this couldn't have happened without his father's knowledge. And his father, at the time, and by the beginning of 73, was the head of the Republican Party of the United States. He was the chairman of the RNC. And so I wondered what the father's, what he thought about all this. And I went through all of these books. There are many, many books I'm sure your listeners have on their shelves. And there was no mention of any of this stuff. And so I began thinking about the father, and I thought, well, he may be a more interesting figure than I realized. And I also wondered, how did the father become president of the United States? Because if you think about it, he was not what you'd call great shakes. He was not terribly charismatic. He was
not dynamic. No, he had to learn how to eat the fried pork rinds.
Right. He had all.
Who was that guy who was his big? He was his Karl Rove.
Well, there was Roger Ailes.
No.
You're talking about Roger Stone, Black.
No.
Manafort Black.
No, the guy who.
Oh, I know you're talking about. You're talking about the guitar guy.
Yeah, the guitar
Lee
guy.
Atwater.
Lee Atwater.
Yeah,
oh, what a fascinating character he was.
Boogeyman, yeah, great
I mean, this is just such an amazing. Everything about this family just seems so. It doesn't seem like it could possibly be real.
You know something? One reviewer described Family of Secrets as Robert Ludlum on steroids, because it's honestly, if people like to read thrillers, there is nothing strange. As they say, there's nothing. The truth is stranger than fiction, and particularly in regards to this family. Basically, as I started looking at H.W. Bush, I discovered some strange things. I'll just give you one example. First of all, he'd been named CIA director in 1976 by Gerald Ford, and I thought, 1976, that was the one moment where the CIA was really on the hot seat. The Frank Church's committee, they were investigating them. They were looking into improprieties, illegalities. There was a real question whether the CIA was even going to survive.
Right.
And so here they bring in this new director, and who, out of all the people they could bring in, who do they bring in? This kind of milquetoasty guy who can't make his mind up about things, has supposedly no background in intelligence. He'd been briefly a congressman. He'd been briefly a diplomat to no great effect. And I thought, that's so strange. I went back and I read the clippings, and there was nothing explaining this. The newspaper sort of just said, I don't know. And so I thought, well, that's strange. Why would they put him in there if he has no intelligence experience?
Right.
And as I went back and studied him over several years, what I discovered was he did have intelligence experience. He had a secret life, Pat. He had this whole secret life going back for decades. And basically, this man, George H.W. Bush, was something like our Vladimir Putin. He had a secret life working in the intelligence services, and they propelled him all the way up into the presidency of the United States.
Now, how did you discover that?
Well, I started by working my way backward, and then I went back to the beginning, and I looked at these patterns. In World War II, when his father was being investigated for trading with the enemy, and I'm sure this was not unconnected, young H.W., I call him Poppy in the book, that's his nickname with the family, and they do that to distinguish George from, 41 and 43, but George and George, so Poppy and W. What they did, in World War II, Poppy signed up. He was one of the youngest flyers. He was a bomber pilot. and he has a very interesting track record there. He, among other things, he was involved with aerial reconnaissance, aerial surveillance, and it was top secret work, and it was intelligence. And they worked with a special intelligence command controlled by MacArthur, whose family, by the way, went way back with the Harrimans, who were the partners of Prescott Bush. And for example, when Douglas MacArthur, I was looking for a job as a young man, a summer job or something, his mother actually asked Averill Harriman, hey, can you get this kid a job? I mean, this is the interweaving. And then years later, when H.W. is the ambassador to the United Nations, his next door neighbor is Mrs. Douglas MacArthur. And then I find her on the campaign contribution forms when H.W. is first running for office as a young man. So all this interweaving. Anyway, in World War II, he's involved with this covert stuff. The family is already deeply connected to... See, there was intelligence way before there was a CIA. Naval intelligence. The Navy was the key factor, and intelligence was absolutely crucial. Tied in with the oil industry, the military was and has always been the largest consumer of petroleum products, period. And so there's this interweaving of all of these interests. So they go way back. Anyway.
You know what? I just realized that we have to go to news. We're like 4 minutes late. So hold that thought.
Sure.
We will do that, and we will come back. And right now we're going to check in with George Acevedo in the KGO radio newsroom. George, are you there?
That's got his own.
Good morning. I'm Pat Thurston. Russ Baker's my guest. His book is Family of Secrets, The Bush Dynasty, America's Invisible Government and the Hidden History of the Last 50 Years. Fascinating stuff, and I know we've got phone calls here coming in, but I interrupted you mid-thought. Where
was I? Let's see. I was kind of working my way. Oh, I know what it was. You asked me about HW. HW, or Bush 41. I started getting indications, Poppy, that he had a background in intelligence long before he was put in as CIA director, supposedly as a so-called kind of intelligence virgin. And so there was the World War II stuff. And then I started looking at these companies he started. He started this little oil company, a little tiny company out in West Texas of no great shakes, but the money coming into it is from the man you were talking about, Philip Graham, and all these people. Big people are putting huge amounts of money into this little tiny company. It never seems to make any money, and then he starts an offshore division. He's traveling all over the world, places where there's no oil, no reason to be doing any business. I think, what kind of a company is this? And then he's putting rigs off of Cuba prior to the Bay of Pigs with Cuban exiles working on the rigs. And I go, wait a minute, what kind of a company is this? Doesn't make any money. Big people in Washington are pouring funds in. And then I start finding all this correspondence between people affiliated with the Bush family, businesses, and Alan Dulles talking about recruiting agents abroad and so on. It's all in Family of Secrets. All the documentation is there.
And Alan Dulles at the time was the CIA director.
Yes, and he was a very, very close friend of the Bush family way before then. See, he was an attorney on Wall Street. He was involved with intelligence all the way back to World War I. And they all knew each other, and they all had these clients like the United Fruit Company and all these large American companies doing this major, colonial thing all over Latin America and Asia and so forth. And they very much viewed this as a club, and they viewed intelligence as an opportunity to look after their interests.
808810 is our telephone number, 808-0810. Russ Baker, my guest. Let's take some phone calls here, Russ. Let's get Tony calling from San Francisco. Tony, hi. Welcome to KGO. You're on with Russ Baker. Go ahead.
Hi, how you doing? Great show. It's important to get this information out. This brings up so many things in my mind. You didn't mention. You mentioned the Walker family in your book, Barbara's side of the family.
Well, that's not Barbara's side of the family. That's George's mother's family. But I very much do talk about that family.
Okay, yeah. You're familiar with Phillips's book, American Dynasty?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So I won't get into that. Did you know that George H.W. and Richard Nixon were in Dallas on the day Kennedy was assassinated? Does that come up in your book?
Well, let me tell you this. I've got 4 chapters of all new information related to the Kennedy assassination that has some reason to be in a book about the Bush family.
Yes.
And we'll talk about that. We'll get into some depth on that. Was there a specific question that you...